Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Billings. I'm the vice chair for the Society for American Archivists, the student chapter. Welcome, everybody. Today, we are hosting Ashlyn Velte. Ashlyn has been an archivist for nearly 10 years after graduating from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with her master's in librarian science. She currently works as a senior processing archivist and assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and she's here to tell us more about her role there and how she got there. So please, let's welcome Ashlyn.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen real fast. All right. Looks good.
And we are recording just in case everyone didn't get the notice, and we will have time for questions after the presentation.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me and for inviting me to talk a little bit today. I put some slides together mostly to keep myself on track. Otherwise, I will go off on a tangent and forget what I wanted to share with you all. Um, so as Rebecca said, I'm the senior processing archivist at the University of Colorado Boulder Libraries currently. I wanted to start with a little bit about my background. Um, I attended my undergraduate degree was at Ithaca College in New York State, same town as Cornell, but not the prestigious Ivy League school. And then I also attended UNC Chapel Hill for my master's degree in library science. When I was at university or when I was at Ithaca College, I was studying applied psychology. And like most psychology majors, I knew I was going to have to go to grad school in something, but I didn't know what. And I was working on a honors thesis with my advisor during my senior year, and I was talking about how much I enjoyed putting together my literature review. And I think everyone was shocked by that because most people don't enjoy putting together literature reviews. And I had a professor who knew me really well say, maybe you should consider going into library school. You could continue to work at a university and like you wouldn't have to necessarily be a professor to do that. And I was like, wow, that actually sounds super great because I really enjoyed college and I like students and I like the educational environment. So I applied to and got into the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. While I was there, I received a fellowship um, that helped me get work experience while I was in graduate school and also helped pay for my graduate program, which is a huge blessing. And I know not something everybody gets, but during the fellowship, they placed me in the special collections library. I thought I wanted to be like a regular liaison librarian, instruction librarian at an academic university. But when they placed me in special collections, I was placed with the curatorial unit and I was working on accessioning new collections. And I was also working on some community archiving projects where I was working really closely with some underrepresented communities to document their histories and fill in gaps in the collection at Wilson Library. And it was I like immediately understood the importance and impact that libraries have on people whose stories don't get represented in the dominant narrative. And I was like, this is for me. I am going to be an archivist, and this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So after graduate school, I was hired as an archivist on the tenure track at the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. I was there for 3 years, and they hired me to set up some of their digital archiving programs. My title was archivist because they knew I would be doing more than just digital archiving. I was doing like regular processing. I was doing a lot of outreach and instruction and reference work as well. So because it was a relatively small shop, I was only the second archivist there. There was uh, a wide breadth of skills and things I got to do on that job, which was one of the reasons why I took the job. I was like, I really need to prove to future employers that that I have experience in a lot of different areas so that if I do want to focus more in the future, I can prove that I've kind of got the whole big picture of what archiving is. Um, Then I was hired in 2019 at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I've been here since then. I wanted to give you a little bit of context about our collections and what we have to manage at CU before I jump a little bit into my role. It's a lot of stuff. We are 107 years old and established in 1918 as part of the history department, well before it moved into the libraries. We're the second oldest and second largest archive in the state of Colorado. The first is History Colorado, the State Historical Society which is run by the state. We have over 1,800 collections and over 33,000 linear feet of material. So for those of you who aren't archivists, 33,000 linear feet of material. If you can picture like a regular size banker's box, that's 1 linear foot of material. So we have at least 33,000 boxes. I wouldn't be surprised if we had more. Um, the Again, some of you are going to be probably familiar with archives. For those of you who aren't, the formats that we collect are basically anything that's unpublished. We collect on photographs, organizational records, t-shirts, pins, posters, flyers, audio, video materials, film, digital records, personal papers, anything that somebody or some organization would have created throughout the course of their life. Are the things that we collect because we're collecting documents that evidence the past. Um, what's also really fun about archives is that every archives has like unique collecting areas that they have strengths in, so that we can all kind of document our own little pieces of history. The collecting strengths that we have are Colorado politics and politicians, labor, natural sciences. Those are the areas we've kind of historically collected in and have been historical strengths of our collections, but we're not actively growing in. We aren't talking about opening up politics and politicians again, though, because we are one of the major repositories in the state for Colorado politics and politicians. We also are the current collecting areas, the ones that we're continuing to grow collections in are collections on the Atomic West, which are our collections documenting nuclear activity and the nuclear industrial complex in the Western U.S., with a particular focus on Rocky Flats, which was a nuclear weapons facility just outside of Denver. Um, we also collect on Rocky Mountain counterculture and social change, so things like music and hippie culture and activism culture in like the 60s and 70s. Probably for obvious reasons, there's a long history of that both in Boulder and in Colorado. We are located at the university, and so we also collect CU Boulder history. We're not formally the university archives, but we are the final resting place for documents that are considered permanent by our retention schedule. So we do have CU Boulder history, including student records and administrative papers from both the system and this campus. Um, we have an American music research collection. We have a collections on innovations in Jewish life. We have a collection on experimental film, all of which support specific programs on campus. My current role is senior processing archivist. The things that fall under my purview are setting processing standards for all of the archivists that work here. We have 5 or 6 archivists that currently work here and do some form of processing. And so one of my big roles when I was hired was formalizing our processing manual so that we're all on the same page about how we're using archive space and the descriptive standards that we're using. Across all of our finding aids. Um, I also prioritize the processing projects for all of the archivists. So I collaborate with them. It's not me responsible for dictating what they do because I'm not a supervisor, but we collaborate together to identify processing priorities, and then I help track and, which is the next bullet point, track and support them in their processing. I'm also our product owner for Archive Space. Archive Space is our database of finding aids. It's a software product that's open source, but we host through Lyrasis. And so in my role, I sort of identify any improvements we want to make to like the Archive Space public user interface, and I communicate with Lyrasis about any issues that we're having if there's something weird happening with archive space. I also supervise students. When I was first hired, I had like 8 students. I've slowly kind of limited the amount that I supervise as I've gotten busier and busier. But I currently have 4 students, and they help me process projects. So much of my time is spent sort of managing big picture, and the students help me actually produce the processing that's needed. I manage their projects, so I make sure that they are trained and have support to answer questions, documentation for the projects, and I break down the project into smaller chunks for them. Um, I also, when I can, try to do my own processing for some collections that are either too complicated or too sensitive for students to perform. Most of my students are undergraduate students that are hired through work study. I also do collection management for the Atomic West, so I build relationships with that community, and I try to bring in collections, though I'm doing so kind of really slowly and as they approach me, mostly because of capacity, my own capacity, but yeah, we're still building collections in that area, and that's been a really fulfilling part of my job. And then when I can, I do reference and instruction. Reference is primarily for the Atomic West collections because that's the subject area in our collections that I'm most familiar with. And I also do instruction as needed to support our special collections instruction program, um, primarily on history of the environment because that overlaps with the Atomic West a little bit. And then also because I'm faculty here, I do research and service as well. So a little bit about faculty roles in case any of you are interested in going into academic libraries. Some academic libraries, librarians are considered faculty, and that's just going to depend institution by institution. I've been fortunate enough that both of my professional jobs have been tenure track faculty roles. Um, and so um, it depends on the institution exactly how the faculty roles are structured, but typically what I've seen is that there's some form of um, breakdown of percentage of time across librarianship, research, and service. Sometimes outreach if you're at a land grant institution, like the University of Idaho is a land grant institution. And so I also had a portion of my time dedicated to outreach. Um, and librarianship is like your job, the things I'm responsible for, the uh, managing collections or talking with people, whatever part you would imagine librarianship to be. And then research is producing some sort of professional output that benefits the profession. So that could be presentations. I think I have this all on the next slide, but that could be like presentations, articles, book chapters, those kinds of things. And service is any sort of service back to either professional organizations or within the libraries or the college for uh, like leadership, faculty governance type roles. So like, for example, I'm supporting a faculty committee this year. And then depending on how faculty are structured at a university, they could be tenure track or non-tenure track. And basically, what's nice about faculty roles is that there's generally a progression towards some sort of promotion. And so that gives you like goals to work toward throughout your career. Here's my slide on research. So I mentioned this already, but you've got presentations, articles, books and book chapters. If you're faculty at a university, they generally give you some sort of page where they track all of your outputs. So I've linked here to my CU Experts page. You are not obligated to look at that if you do not want to. I also recently published a small book. In the Trends and Archives Practices series through SAA with some of my coworkers and colleagues here at CU Boulder on accessing privacy protected records at public institutions. There are 3 case studies on government records, grand jury records, and human subject records, and kind of walking through the steps on determining what level of access those kinds of records could have. The goal being to limit overly conservative access policies. So instead of being afraid that somebody might access something that they shouldn't and restricting everything, just being a little more nuanced in your approach to setting um, access policies for collections. Um, and that's it. We can move on to questions.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. That was
Yeah.
so many things. You have a really diverse set of skills. I think I'm always impressed at the huge variety of tasks that fall under one role, right? Do you have to, well, I will say to everyone here, please put your questions in the chat and I will answer them as they pop up. Otherwise, we'll just have a conversation. But I would love to hear questions from the audience. But do you have how do you divide your time between so many different things? Is it one of the like 10% this, 15% that? And how on earth would you even begin to measure that? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the role. So here in our faculty roles, um, we're judged our percentage of time is supposedly divvied out 60%, no, 40% librarianship, 40% research, and 10% service. But that's more of like how our scores, our annual evaluation scores get judged. How you divvy up your time is probably going to be very different. And as a librarian, I end up spending most of my time doing librarianship, which is how I want it. So that
and
works,
all of the archiving
yeah,
activities fall under
under
the purview of
librarianship.
librarianship. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Um, And as far as like managing all of the different things, it's really being intentional with my supervisor and with myself. I think part of what I like about librarianship and most library roles that I've seen is that they're really self-directed. So you have to be kind of independent and be able to manage your own time. Um, I really enjoy that, but because it means I get to pick projects that really interest me. Um, but yeah, it's like just making sure that I'm picking things that are going to be of the most impact. Um, because
That's
there's
the magic word.
lots and lots of things that I could be doing that I are important, but it's like, what are the things that are most important now? And like taking into account all of the things that the libraries is doing as a whole, and how does my piece of the puzzle fit in with like the goals of the library and student success and researcher success on campus. And making things more accessible is like my biggest thing. And so something I mentioned was like when I took the job at Idaho, I really wanted to get a diverse range of skill sets. And part of what attracted me about this position was like it would allow me to focus a little bit more on processing. So that's my primary like role in the library is making collections accessible.
That's awesome. All right, we have some questions that have come in. Let's start at the top. Do you think holding multiple masters will help make you more competitive for academic archival positions?
I have not seen that to be the case. I think it's not going to hurt. So if like you got a master's degree before your library degree, and then after you got that degree, you decided, oh, actually, I want to be a librarian, I'm going to go back and get another master's degree. It's certainly not going to hurt you. But I haven't seen it be something where if you have an additional degree in an area, that it's particularly helpful. I think that might be more historically true, but if your experience is in a particular like say you want to be a liaison librarian and you want to liaise to science collections, if all of your experience is working with science professors, science students, engineering students, um, I think that's what they're most interested in is like your background and work, in engineering. But again, it's certainly not going to like hurt to have an additional degree.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, thank you. Let's see. We have another comment from someone who wants to work in special collections. Do you have any recommendations for getting a foot in or a key class or skill to develop during school?
That's a really good question. I think the thing that we look for the most in recent graduates is significant work experience. And I don't mean like you have to have had a full-time job before, before we'll consider hiring you. It's more like, can you articulate the skills that you learned through an internship experience or a part-time job at a library, if you know you want to work in a particular type of setting, that like have you sought out opportunities? Like if you wanted to work in an academic archive, like have you worked at an academic archive before? Or can you translate your experience at some other kind of archive for an academic archive? Um, if you want to work primarily in museums, have you worked in museums before? Like those kinds of things are like the I think the most important thing is like, have you gotten some experience in the kind of thing you would like to be doing, and can you articulate what the skills were that you took away from that job experience? So like being pretty clear, like, yes, I processed a collection. It was 45 linear feet. I had to organize it and it was challenging because, it had all these different formats and I had to like put it in order and this is why I made the decision I made. Like all those like specific examples that you can point to is really helpful. And getting experience with the kinds of things that you think will be important. So in archives, generally, we want to know that you've processed a collection or partially processed a collection, that you have experience with finding aids, building finding aids, and creating finding aids. Um, and that you have some sort of knowledge of the needs of some different formats. Doesn't have to be all of them, but like if you've worked with AV materials and you've worked with paper materials, those kinds of things. Personally, I found my background in digital, when I was at UNC, I also got a certificate in digital curation, which was kind of like a digital archiving certificate. And I found that a really marketable skill. Coming right out of grad school because a lot of older archivists hadn't gotten that experience. And so they were looking for new graduates. And this was 10 years ago, so I don't know what's changed, but they were looking for new graduates with digital archiving background. So that really benefited me. I wish I had taken a Python class or some sort of coding class, and like a command line class. Um, and as far as archives classes, that would be useful. I think a description class can be really useful, an arrangement and description class, as well as some sort of appraisal class, because I think appraisal is one of the harder things we do. Like, how do you identify something that has high research value, um, is something worth taking a class in. So, yeah, digital archiving and then just basics.
Those are excellent points. So it's not even the length of the experience, but it's being able to articulate what you have done, or maybe relating previous job experience or classes in your work and being able to demonstrate that you understand the material.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like they just want to know that you know it. They don't want to have to be the one to train you right away. So as long as you can articulate that you have enough to be able to either teach yourself or like pick it up really quickly, that's what they're looking for. And so yeah, it's not about the length of the experience. It's about, okay, what were the skills I picked up from this experience and how can I articulate that as like something that's going to inform how I'm going to approach the position
So
that I'm
even
applying
taking a
for.
class on a topic, if you can demonstrate that you're familiar with the terminology, and just even homework assignments would be enough to demonstrate that you know the landscape, even if you don't have practical work experience.
Yeah, I've
That's
definitely
awesome.
seen people apply who have said, I haven't used archive space in a professional setting, but I had like a final project and a class where I had to create a finding aid. And I was like, cool, at least I know you have used EAD or have practice implementing standards. Yeah.
Great, great. All right, we have some more questions. What is a current project that you are excited about?
That's always a tough one. I'm currently, this is really I don't know, in the weeds. But I'm currently working on a project to implement a digital objects workflow. So, in archive space, there's a digital objects module that will allow us to link from finding aids to our digital library. And we've never implemented that part of archive space before. And we're working on the workflows for like what that will look like to kind of link more seamlessly between the finding aid and our digital library. It also will allow us to put like some of those digital digitized objects in context of the finding aid so that often like in the digital library they just are like objects and you're like cool, I don't know how this relates to this or this relates to this, but like having the finding aid actually connect all of those pieces together I think will be a real benefit to users. And so that's why it's exciting to me.
That is exciting. And I understand that you are the owner of the archive space instance, but would you say that other archivists who work at your institution need to be very familiar with digital archiving? Is that a skill that most graduates must have some familiarity with at this point in time?
Um, I think it's a really valuable skill because as we get so archives are generally like 30-ish years behind
Oh,
in the time period that they're collecting in.
ah,
So we're getting collections now from like 1995, 2000s, sometimes into the 2000s. So the more we go on, the more collections are going to be coming to us in digital formats. And so I do think it is a valuable skill to kind of even just understand the basics of digital archiving theory. You don't have to have done it, but if you're like, oh, I know that in order to preserve something, I need to plug it into a write blocker before I migrate the files off of the media device. Like just having just knowing those things, even if you don't know how to do that, can kind of set you up for some success, especially if you're in like a lone arranger context where you're the only archivist. Um, because then you can say like, oh, I've heard that I need to do this, or I've heard I need to look this up. And there's a lot you can do with a little bit of information on a topic. As far as being familiar with ArchiveSpace, which is our finding aid database, I would say having some familiarity with some collection management software is really valuable. And most of our archivists are really into the back end of archive space most of the time. Like they're uploading CSV files and they know all of the different fields. And so, yeah, the more experience you have with finding a software, it doesn't have to be archive space, the more that will set you up for success.
good to know. Good to know. All right, here we go. Is there a facet of archives or special collections or being tenured faculty that you found particularly surprising or challenging to adjust to? Great
Um,
question.
that is a really great question. I think what I both like and is really challenging about faculty roles is that like there's lots of things I could be doing. And there's lots of different kinds of things I could be doing. I could be doing like really intense computer work. I could be, moving boxes around or rehousing collections, which is really hands-on. I could be, mentoring other faculty or mentoring students. Like these are really diverse skill sets, and I really like getting to dabble in a lot of those different things. I think the challenge with that is like it's almost overwhelming the amount of things that kind of come onto my plate. And so being able to say this is important and this is also important, but not important right now, is a skill that like I think all of us are constantly trying to work through. So that's surprised me a lot. I think also, when I first entered graduate school, I had an idea of what library life was going to be like, and it's been a much more extroverted profession than I was anticipating, which I have ended up really enjoying. But if you're going into libraries thinking, oh, I will not be talking to people, that is not the case. I think I spend most of my day talking to people.
That's fair. Both of those points are well made. You cannot be impactful on 100 different things at a time.
Yes, yeah.
And yes, absolutely about being more. I think we all had a vision of the, quiet room with a box of materials, and that's not necessary.
No.
So
Especially
good
if
to
you're
hear.
working with students, it's often really rambunctious.
All right, all right. Let's see here. Thanks everyone for putting in so many questions. I really appreciate it. The next one is this person is curious about the faculty characteristic of academic library work in colleges. Does that require actual instruction time, and does the management of student assistants qualify as instruction? Thank you for the organized and detailed presentation.
Yeah, of course. It depends on your role, how much instruction you'll actually do. So there are faculty in our library who teach credit-bearing courses. That was not a primary piece of my role. And so like faculty throughout campus have teaching responsibilities. Our teaching translates to librarianship. So whatever, at least at this campus, and it's slightly different everywhere. Um, so like whatever our role was that we were hired to accomplish, that translates into what campus considers teaching. Um, so it really depends on your role in the libraries, like how much teaching you actually do. And there are instruction librarians who teach one-shot sessions multiple times a week. And there are librarians who do cataloging and don't do any instruction at all. So it's just a matter of the role that you were hired for. That might look slightly different at different institutions, but I've never really seen a library where all faculty are required to do credit-bearing teaching.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of instruction, regardless of whether or not it's credits, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Often in academic contexts, the way the library demonstrates value to campus is through student support, and that often comes in the form of instruction. So it's a
Absolutely.
big part of academic libraries.
That makes sense. Okay. Here's the next one. The people we see in movies who handle artifacts in museums or similar venues of the like, would that fall under archival studies? This person wants to do hands-on work with physical pieces as well as research.
Um, Not usually. So archives tend to be paper documents. And of course, there's also other formats like the ones I mentioned. So the archives tend to be focused on informational value, as opposed to object value.
Mhm.
So the what is the information that can be about like evidence of the past that can be gleaned from an archival object is usually what archives are interested in. Museums tend to be more focused on that object value. So this thing is important because so and so owned it, or it's like was part of a important building, or this is demonstrating some sort of indigenous cultural heritage, something like that. That tends to be more in the museum world where they deal with three-dimensional objects. We do have conservators in the library here who do a lot of book repair and document repair for the archives. And so if working really hands-on with physical objects is like something you're interested in, I would look at museums and conservation um, as like two career paths that you could go down. The museum work might be more similar to librarianship as far as like cataloging items go, whereas like conservation would be like repairing objects and stabilizing objects for long-term use. And conservationists can specialize in paper formats or three-dimensional object formats.
I've never heard it distinguished that way. Thank you.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
really helpful because we don't talk about museums very often, and we don't, I don't know, the archives and the libraries are the where we focus, and we don't think about paper versus objects. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do you think any particular listed skill or experience on your resume or cover letter helped get you your current position?
I don't I mean, it's very dependent on the position. So, like, the thing that's going to have gotten me my position isn't necessarily going to be the thing that gets another person a position. So, like, nobody would hire me as a liaison librarian because I don't have liaison librarian experience. But I think the thing that got me this position was really focused on processing and documentation of processing standards. And so I was able to demonstrate that I had done a lot of the big picture thinking at the University of Idaho and at the University of North Carolina for um, setting processing standards and identifying priority projects, and that I had experience doing archival processing because archival processing is like a really unique skill set um, that you can really only get by doing it. So the fact that I had done it before I think was the biggest thing that got me this job. The thing that I think got me my first job was that digital curation certificate and some of my experience with Born Digital material. Like was able to demonstrate that I had used digital forensic software, um, that I understood like the life cycle of digital objects. Um, and so it's going to be job dependent. Kind of the skill sets that they're looking for. And so that's why looking at the job ad is really important because they will tell you exactly the skills in the job ad that they're going to be evaluating you on. And so often when I'm on a search committee, we will sit down with the job ad and almost use those bullet points that are like job requirements as a rubric, to say, yes, this person has this, yes, this person has this, yes, this person has this. And so the more you can address each of those bullet points in your application material, even if it's just to say I have experience with this, can often get you through the first round.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to clarify that some roles you can only get experience from previous positions, and then other ones it's based on what you've learned. But uh,
Yeah,
that's always all the rubrics.
always look at the job ads.
Yes. Let's see here. What classes helped you the most in your early work? Does everyone need to learn how to catalog and digitize? I guess we talked about that a little bit already, but please.
I don't think everyone needs how to learn to do anything. It's going to depend on the kind of role that you want and seeking out those classes that are going to give you the background you need in that role. Honestly, I think the most important thing for anyone who wants to get a job in libraries to do is to get experience. I know that most of my archiving knowledge actually came from mentorship, and it was almost like an apprenticeship, the role I had at UNC. And so I did learn a lot of the theory in my classes, but being able to see how it actually applied to collections was, I think, the thing that set my application apart from some other applications when I went to apply for jobs out of grad school. Um, yeah.
Fantastic.
And I know internships are competitive, so I'm sorry, but yeah.
All right, so I apologize in advance for not pronouncing this correctly, but it says hello from Spec at U Idaho, and they say they still benefit from the work that you did there.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca.
And the commenter was named Rebecca, so that totally works. Do you think it's important to try to publish a book in the library or archives for tenure, or just take a book publishing opportunity if it arises?
Yeah, it's not important to publish a book for tenure. Um, I mean, it will depend a little bit on your own institution's tenure requirements. And every institution's tenure requirements are very different. So like at the University of Idaho, the tenure requirements were very different than the tenure requirements here. And I do like tenure track faculty here are expected to do a lot more publishing than they were at the University of Idaho. Um, so it's going to depend on your institution somewhat. I would say in most cases that I have seen, it is not important that you publish a book to achieve tenure. Often, book publishing happens after tenure when you have more time to actually focus on a book. Um, and this book was quite short, and we had originally envisioned it as like a chapter or an article. So um, I think that's how we got the book opportunity.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, the next question is, do you actively recruit your student worker archival processors, maybe from particular departments or institutes, or simply pull from library applicants? Do you have any outstanding training tips or lessons learned to share? It's a
Ooh,
lot.
that's a great question. I, so most of my students are undergraduate students. We do occasionally hire apprentices, or like, I don't know if apprentice is the right word, but interns from the University of Denver because that's our local library school. We don't have a library program at CU. Um, so I think I've interned two students from the University of Denver. Um, over the course of my time here. And then as far as like recruiting students, I tend to just send out recruiting undergraduate students, I tend to just send out a job application to the general pool, and then I read their application materials. I tend to see interest I tend to look for interest in libraries in some way, even if they don't want to like end up in a career in libraries, because I find it makes them a little more focused. And I've had really good luck with the history program. I've had really good luck with the political science program. I've had really good luck with international studies. So a lot of those like humanities or social sciencey related prof programs. Um, I did currently hire an astronomy student because I
Wow.
have some physics collections I need to process. Um, but it's going to depend a little bit on what I'm looking to process and how they articulate why they want the job. Because I am not a place in the library where you can like sit and do your homework. Um, and then training tips is try to present information in more than one way. So I usually give students like a set of instructions that's written out. I also tend to sit down and walk them through what I expect them to do. And then I try to do like like if we're labeling folders or whatever, I'll label a couple folders with them so that we've all done it together and they kind of get the idea of what they're looking to do. So I think presenting information in multiple ways can be really helpful. I think documenting, for me, documenting what I want them to do is really important, not just for them, but because I'm balancing so many different projects at the same time, it's often useful to have it written down somewhere so I can go back and say, oh, this is what I wanted them to do. Um, and then yeah, just being really clear with expectations and like why we're doing what we're doing. I also tend to start with like what we're aiming to accomplish. So I'm like, we are trying to make a finding aid, and a finding aid is supposed to help people find materials. And so like starting with like what we're working toward can also be motivating to students so that they're not sitting there thinking like I'm just labeling folders for no reason.
Right. At the end goal.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see here. Is there a type of material in your archive that has been challenging to work with that you wish you'd had training to deal with? For example, rare or damaged books, older AV media that needs tech or training to access, etc.
I think the things that are actually harder to work with are restrictions, which is part of why I published the book that I published. Because often I'm looking at something and I'm like, wow, I have no idea if people should access this or not. And as an archivist, my goal is for as much access as possible. But often I'm looking at something that has social security numbers on it, or financial information, or student records, or copyrighted material, or like things that are just like really, you look at them and you're like, wow, this seems really important. I want people to have access to this, but I also have no idea what the laws are around access to it. And so I found that harder than like format specific things.
Mm.
Again, which is why we published the book so that there's more resources out there for people to help evaluate decisions like that, because it's going to be really case by case, what decisions you end up making. As far as like format specific challenges, audiovisual formats are always really hard, especially magnetic media, because they're fragile, they have a really short lifespan. Um, and so finding the resources to digitize them is really challenging. It costs a lot of money to digitize magnetic media. Um, and working in cultural heritage, we're not overflowing with resources in that regard. Um, so I think that's the biggest thing is just like trying to find the resources to do the work, to save some of these things that are not going to make it another 20 years.
That seems to be a common familiar challenge.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The next question says, I work in a preservation lab at an academic library as a bindery coordinator slash library assistant. I agree everyone is looking for conservators. Yeah, so that's a whole other skill set that absolutely.
Yeah. And I do know a conservator. If anybody wants to talk to her, I can put you in touch. She's really great.
Awesome. Good to
Yeah.
know. And I believe we put your institution link up at the top of the chat for people who are looking for reference links. Moving on, let's see. Do you have any unique examples of university and or community service that you've taken part in and which you've been able to use in support of your tenure case?
Um, so most service is professionally focused or co university focused. So I've worked. I'm currently on the SAA Privacy and Confidentiality Steering Committee. I'm going to be chair, I think is actually the role of, I'm going to be chair next year. Um, so that is something that I plan to put in my tenure case. Um, I've also worked on a number of committees in the library here that are faculty committees that I get elected to, and I will put those in my tenure case. At this institution, it is very rare that service is something you have to do, and so you kind of have to check that box, but it's not something that they're going to give you tenure based on. Um, so you have to prove that you're making some progress and growth in that area, but not, they don't want you spending all of your time trying to lead these organizations or anything like that. They're not, I have heard of professors elsewhere on campus who do community service as part of their service. I would guess that that's kind of a similar case where it's good to have, but they're not going to get tenure based on it. And it might be really dependent on like the academic department that they work in. So I think it's more professionally and university focused.
Great. All right. Thank you. Let's see. The next one is a comment. It says they found museum collections management knowledge very clutch in archival settings because of the lack of education around artifacts and libraries, generally speaking. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, we also don't, I think museum folks and archivists think about collections very differently. So if you're dealing with a three-dimensional object in an archive, it can be really useful to have museum background.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. The next one is, are you using any AI programs in processing your collections?
This has been a big question this
Yes.
year, that our administrators are trying to get us to implement more AI across the libraries in general. I have some ideas of things I might want to try, but no, we are not currently using AI programs for processing collections. I'm also not really sure how we would do that, because so much of processing is like physically working with documents. So it just seems like something that is really hard to make usable for computer. But I have some ideas for either like subject headings or agents that might be useful, but I haven't had time to sit down and teach myself AI.
Great. Fantastic. I know that's a hot topic this year.
Yeah, it is a hot topic this year.
We have some people saying thank you for your answers, and they really appreciate that you wrote your book. And let's see, we have a question that um, I'm hesitating because they call it a stupid question. I don't agree. But the question is,
Not a
what?
stupid question.
No, it's absolutely not. What do people on professional committees actually do? And this is
Yeah,
a practical question for students, which is what we are.
that is a really great question. So often we're helping lead the organization in some way. So, the Privacy and Confidentiality Committee on SAA is focused on educating SAA members on privacy and confidentiality issues. So we often will do things like put out a roundup of all the resources that got published on the topic once a month. We plan events like coffee chats, um, and then we, survey membership and try to see what they want to do. But it's a lot of event planning. I've also been on more regional professional organizations, so like the Society of Rocky Mountain Archivists or Northwest Archivists. Um, and sometimes, I mean, depending on the role you get assigned to or elected to, you could be taking notes for meetings. You could be doing the financial information, like the financial checking. So there's like um, A treasurer often is a role. Um, and primarily what the professional organizations do, right, is they're supposed to support and educate members. So they'll put on a conference once a year. They'll organize educational events or training events. They'll send out newsletters. And so all of the different parts of an organization will be supporting one of those activities in some way. So it does depend a little bit on the role that you get assigned, but primarily professional organizations are supporting like member member professional development in some way. And so somebody has to do that work, and it's often through volunteer service, the board of the organization. SERMA, Society of Rocky Mountain Archivists, and Northwest Archivists are nonprofits, and they're entirely run by archivists who do it in their spare time. Um, so that's part of what professional committees do. Yeah,
That's great. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, all right. So the next question is, how did you know it was time for you to move on from one institution to another? Were you worried about moving on too quickly?
That is a really great question.
Hmm.
When I got the job at the University of Idaho, I was really excited and I loved that position pretty much all the way up through the end. But I knew when I got to there's like a halfway to tenure mark, I knew that I wanted to evaluate whether I wanted to stay at my halfway through tenure mark and again if I got tenure. And so I went up for the halfway through tenure process and I got really positive feedback, which felt really good. And then the job at CU came up at about that time. And I remember thinking, I've not seen a job like this posted ever. Um, and I was really interested in the job responsibilities of this job, which I had not seen a job like it because I was always monitoring jobs I find it's really useful to know what skills you should work on just based on what people are advertising for. And so even if I'm not looking for a job, I will keep an eye on the job postings.
Such good advice.
Um, and I hadn't seen a job advertised like this, and I was like, let me see what happens if I apply for it. It sounds really interesting. And my mom lives in Colorado, so I was like, it would be great to be closer to my mom. Um, so that's like a personal reason too to apply for a job. And then they offered me the position, and it was much higher salary and a lot of really positive things that I felt like I couldn't turn it down. I wasn't really worried about moving on too quickly because I felt like I had made really good progress at the University of Idaho, and I had already gotten a different job, so I wasn't worried about being marketable to other jobs.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay, great. Let's see. The next question is, I'm in my first archivist position after a couple of years of being a traditional librarian. I didn't take any archives coursework during my MLIS. Do you think it would be beneficial if I got an archives postmaster certificate?
I'm not familiar with an archives postmaster's certificate, so I don't know if you can share a little bit more about that. What I have heard of people doing is the archives certificate through SAA, which might be what you're talking about. Um, uh, some people have found that beneficial to demonstrate that they have the theory background, if they haven't had a lot of experience up until that point. I don't know that you need to do that if you have an MLS. Um, but some people feel like that's a good idea. You can also do just some of the trainings through SAA if you feel like you're lacking some theory knowledge. But I would say if you've demonstrated through work experience that you have the background, I mean, you're already in an archivist role, so you might just be able to gain some skills just by working in the job. But yeah, some of those courses offered through SAA can be really good at filling in gaps in knowledge.
And there are a
Yeah,
whole bunch of them. There's not just one, there's many.
yeah, there's lots.
Awesome. We are coming to the 5 minute mark, but we have, let's see, at least one more question. Have you seen provenance research, documentation, or studies acquire in a new or different tenor in the world of academic library archives in the wake of museums' reckonings with their sordid collecting histories?
Yeah, we've had similar things happen in archives. We've had similar things happening in archives. So, something SAA is doing right now that I would recommend as a student you keep your eye on is they have an archival repatriation committee that is trying to set national standards for working with Indigenous groups to repatriate Indigenous knowledge. Um, so there's now two standards on Indigenous knowledge. Um, there's also been a big push when I was in library school, so this was 10 years ago. It was in the middle of the community archiving like trend, which I think has really informed how a lot of archives have moved forward from that trend, which is, less extractive models of archiving and more collaboration with underrepresented communities and more education on, okay, maybe this, primarily white archive or dominant, well-funded archive is not the right place for your things, but can we educate you on how to archive your own collections? So there's been a lot of like a post-custodial or post-colonial model of archiving that has kind of moved out of that. Um, yeah. So I think that answers your question.
Great. All right. Thank you. Yes, we have many more thank yous. And someone posted about the Northeast Document Conservation Center as having a great training program. It's a good reference.
hmm They're
Uh,
really wonderful, the Northeast Document Conservation
we have
Center.
time for one last question if people want to squeeze it in. And while I'm waiting, I will ask one of my favorite questions is, since you are the person in charge of the Atomic West, I'm so interested by that. I'm gonna have to look it up. What would you say is a favorite piece or in the collection that you would want to highlight?
Um, we have a copy of the FBI and EPA affidavit and search warrant for the raid that the FBI and the EPA led on Rocky Flats. Um, and there's a lot of documents that look really boring in the Atomic West collections, but are really important, histories. But I think the search warrant is the thing that I pull out a lot that I'm like, look, we have the original, not the original, but we have a copy of the search warrant that was part of a FOIA request um, from the government. And I think it's super cool. It has all of the evidence of the reasons why they needed to conduct a raid, because they were breaking a bunch of environmental laws.
Wow.
So I think that's super cool. There's all these really interesting photographs from the cleanup, and also historical photographs of like how they were storing nuclear waste. Um, we also have a lot of activist records in the collection, and so I like a lot of the photographs from some of the protests that happened at Rocky Flats. So they did things like block the tracks. The railroad tracks used to be the way that they would transport nuclear waste off-site. And so a lot of the protesters would in the 70s and 80s would like hold demonstrations blocking the railroad tracks so that the trains couldn't get out of Rocky Flats.
That's so inspiring. Oh, that's really all right. Well, we have reached time. I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. I feel like
Anytime.
I really learned a lot, and I know that people have really appreciated your very detailed answers to all of your questions and
Thanks.
look forward to reading your book. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
For everybody else, we do not have any events planned for the rest of the year. We're going to let everyone wrap up school in early December, and we will have an all member event coming up in January. So keep your eyes peeled.